Who would believe my life began as an accident stitched together by sleep-deprived curiosity and a YouTube tutorial titled "Grow Green Onions in Water, Zero Dirt, Maximum Zen." One minute I was a grocery store afterthought, bundled between cilantro and celery like a green-lipped chorus, and the next minute I was hero and hostage in a tall, clear drinking glass on a kitchen windowsill. My owner's name is Maris. She is short, olive brown, and carries an energy like the middle of a calypso, warm, insistent, and impossible to ignore. She works nights in a customer service call center, which is to sanity what salsa is to spooning, necessary, messy, merciless. Her mother-in-law, Monica, boasts a garden that could shame a botanical textbook. Basil the size of hats, thyme that smells like a promise, and rows of tidy chives that stand like a very proper choir. Maris worshipped that garden from afar, then tried to summon it into her apartment with the solemn zeal of someone trying to summon better life choices. She watched videos. She watched many videos. She watched gardening videos the way I imagine sailors once watched stars, for direction, for miracles, for excuses. One flashy thumbnail promised simplicity. No tools, no compost, no dirt under the nails, just water. "Hydroponic chic," Maris declared, clutching me like a trophy she hadn't yet earned. "Work smarter, not harder," she said, inflating her chest. I, a bona fide green onion, was plucked, rinsed, and set like a king in a crystal goblet. If plants kept resumes, my new headshot would have read, Scallion, domestic, adaptable, excellent at garnishing. At first she was fantastic. Cold tap water would sing into the glass every morning with a crisp psht, a sound that to me was like a tiny parade. She changed the water daily, as the video suggested, and proclaimed her rookie gardening success to anyone who stayed on the phone long enough to listen. "Fresh as Friday," she crowed. My white stems were taut. My green tops stood to attention like mini flags. I swelled with chlorophyll pride. Then life, the habitual little tsunami, moved in. A major client at her job demanded miracles, emails multiplied like midnight crickets, and the ritual psh lost frequency. The tap's song turned into an embarrassed drip. Every few days, then silence. Maris's intentions evaporated with the steam from her evening pots. She would promise, "Tomorrow I'll repot you," and tomorrow would behave like a prankster. "Hey, lady," I would whisper toward her boots when she rushed by, the word coming out as a rustle of leaf. I'm not a decorative pencil. I prefer being watered, not worshipped in theory. She'd smile into the headset. "You talking to me?" she asked, as Caribbean women do when they mean both yes and maybe. Yes. I may have spoken inside her head. Plants and humans develop borrow languages. Water. Light. Less stove splatter. Also, stop using me as a panic garnish when you discover you have 5 minutes before guests arrive. Her husband Andre, a truck driver whose holidays smell faintly of tar and coffee, would pass through the kitchen like an apologetic season. He is big, soft, and waves excuses like flags. "If the plant starts unionizing," he joked once, tearing off a corner of a stale sandwich, "I'll demand a cut of the parsley." Maris laughed, which is often all it takes to patch a plant's heart. She promised, not for the first time, a domestic renaissance. "This weekend," she said, hands on hips. "This weekend we soil you up proper." The weekend arrived with rain in fat theatrical drops. Maris and Andre trekked to the Sunday market, where Evendoors hawked sacks of soil the way queens used to sell secrets. He bartered badly and proudly, the way truck drivers bargain for diesel and dignity. He insisted, with the stubborn humility of a man who once negotiated a bed delivery down to the nails, that a terracotta pot was essential. Maris hummed an old calypso as she scooped peat and compost, la la ling, simmer the stew, and the air filled with the aroma of damp earth that smelled like an apology and a promise. Repotting was a ceremony. Andre made tea. Maris patted soil into my new home with a reverence I had previously reserved for sunlight. Root diplomacy, she mused, eyes on me. Andre, with a grin, said, "Finally, some culture in this house." For a while it was bliss. Soil took me back like a tide taking a stranded canoe. My roots sighed into the brown, my leaves practiced their best green kernel stance, and the kitchen hummed with domestic optimism. But habits are slippery, and not all promises last longer than a batch of stewed pigeon peas. There were slow, eroding days. Lunches rushed, water forgotten, a spicy stew that warped the air with smoke until the window turned into a sauna glass. Oil spit, sizz pop, on the sill like tiny applauding comets. The refrigerator would open with a whoosh and let out drafts like a grumpy winter. Their arguments, small warm-ups and cool-offs, made the house feel like weather. "Oh, hun, you never finish the jerk chicken?" Maris would crow, accusation sharpening her voice like a steam iron. "What? I said I ate!" Andre would counter, hands explaining via gestures. One bite, one shrug, total truth. I learned their language. Hun could mean affection or accusation. I'm fine could mean send coffee. Their domestic squabbles were not epics. They were nap-size hurricanes, loud enough to rearrange a mood, quiet enough to be resolved by a bowl of rice and a shared grin. One evening, icing the cake of my patience test, Maris attempted a Pinterest-level hydroponic experiment. Mason jars, coffee filters, an inspirational blog, and a pinch of hubris. She skimmed me, balanced pebbles, added a bio boost she'd read about online, and waited for lettuce to float like a salad in a blimp. Instead, the kitchen birthed the great slime. My roots felt like living spaghetti in a neon soup. A sickly film, a buoyant fuzz, bloomed. It was the sort of green that could pass as a new lawn in a horror film. She shrieked, a sound like a kettle being surprised. "Oh heavens, the slime!" Andre, unflappable, peered at my glass cave of goo and declared, "That's not slime, that's a science project." They rescued me with theatrical equipment, scrubbed jars, rinsed roots, surgical scissors, and Andre's trucker-sized practicality. They set me in proper soil with ceremony and labels. "Scallion rescued April," Maris wrote in a shaky hand. She sang nursery rhymes as she worked, and the kitchen settled like a breath released. The new routine emerged like faint green shoots. Maris would change water on nights between late calls. Andrew would sweep the sill if he found a fallen leaf. They would both argue less about whose turn to take out the trash and more about whose turn it was to toss in the compost. Progress, I learned, often arrives in the shape of chores. My life in the pot grew into a ledger of small details. I overheard the rhythms of their lives enclosed within the clink of cups and the tick-tick of keyboards. The neighborhood noises, a saxophone on Tuesdays, children playing soccer like a joyful stampede on Wednesdays, filtered in. When Maris cooked, the house inhaled spices. Scotch bonnet arrived like a firework, allspice like a church bell. Curry leaf smelled of church basements and Sunday dinners. Dialogue became my favorite weather. Maris would practice recipes with the yank of a chef and the softness of a storyteller. "If you add a dash of thyme and a whisper of coconut milk, the stew will sing," she told Andre, stirring with a wooden spoon that had seen better days. "Does the stew sing in tune?" Andre asked, amused. "If it doesn't," she said, "we add bread." They laughed. The pot simmered, psh, and steam wrote letters on the glass. I soaked up their language the way my roots soaked up nutrients, deliberate, hungry, and curious. Sometimes I would speak up. Plants have patience, yes, but also a tendency to nag when neglected. "Hey, give the basil a break," I muttered once when she reached for the scissors. "What was that?" Andre asked, half joking. "Probably the kettle," Maris said, but she looked at my green top with that mix of surprise and affection that made me green with something like joy. "Plants are clever," Andre sighed. He began paying attention to subtle things. He learned the difference between soil that smelled of compost and soil that smelled of neglect. He took up a small ritual. Saturday mornings, coffee in hand, hands in the dirt, fingers learning to read the language of roots. He mumbled to me like men sometimes do to quiet dogs. "Grow on," he would say. "Keep being stubborn." There were horizons beyond the kitchen, drives, small adventures, a trip to the beach where the pair argued over directions like cartographers with poor eyesight. Maris loved to say she needed time to get lost, which meant she wanted to go somewhere without a plan and arrive both hungry and annoyed and somehow better. Andre, competent in maps, would grumble but slow the truck, and they would go. They drove with the engine humming vroom vroom, windows down, life's radio on low. I sat in the sill and imagined salt on my leaves. And the house was not quiet after all. Visitors arrived. Monica once came by, eyes like bright coins. She inspected the kitchen like a judge of weather. "Hi, that basil needs more sun," she declared, and with one hand she adjusted curtains and sunlight as if rerouting the sun itself. She patted Maris's cheek and told tales of gardens where onions grew like mini-trees and spice mingled like old friends. She taught Maris to tuck long stalks into broths and to whisper apologies into soil after a rough day. She taught Andre to bargain with vendors and with radio customers. The story of me, the scallion in the glass who started as a lazy project, became in small ways a symbol. Neighbors noticed the green on the windowsill and asked about herbs. Maris, embarrassed but proud, explained her experimental phase and the eventual triumph of Patova glass. They laughed with her. She laughed about her own inconstancy. "I start projects like I start relationships," she told Monica with a wink. Full of hope, low on follow-through. "You grow where you're planted," Monica replied, and it was less a proverb and more a benediction. I grew too, leaves repaired, roots rewound, the slow miracle of green reasserting itself. When she snipped me and sprinkled my confetti into a pot-off rice, snap snap, I tasted the life I had helped season. Food is memory, food is reconciliation. Each snip was a benediction and a small, delicious death. I gave flavor and a little sharpness, and in return I was spoken to, watered, fussed over. If you ask whether Maris is lazy, I will answer like a seasoned herb. She's gloriously inconsistent, a woman whose life is stitched from late shifts and sudden tenderness. She is the sort of person who misses a watering and then redeems herself with stew and soil. She is in the end the perfect human for a plant that knows patience. And me? I have learned to be diplomatic. I supply the green punctuation to their sentences. I'm a witness and a garnish. I listen to fights and apologies, to phone calls that race and lullabies hummed off-key. I have tasted their life in curry and coconut, in the smoky grace of fried plantain and the low, brassy comfort of slow-cooked beans. Sometimes I feel like a tiny archivist, each ring of my stem a yearbook of scents. If you come to Maris's window, if you press your ear to the glass and ignore the street's gossip, you might catch us. The kettles whistle, the pots simmer, the soft snip of scissors. You might hear Maris planning a trip she won't take, Andre promising to fix the leaky gutter, Monica adjusting curtains like an old maestro. And you might hear me, the scallion who began life in a glass, murmur a final leafy pun. I'm rooted in hope, I say, and she laughs, which is nearer to sunlight than most things. She pours the water, psht, and for a bright shimmering second the kitchen is music. Knives tap, lids ding, the radio croons. The house smells of cumin and sugar, and the messy, miraculous work of living. I am, after all, a green onion, small, resilient, and easily amused. I was born of laziness and curiosity, and I thrive on intermittent care. Not heroic, not tragic, just gloriously chlorophyll-y alive, a tiny green witness to ordinary miracles. Remember this as you nibble the scallion garnish on your rice. Someone changed a glass to soil, someone learned to bargain with time, and a little root kept believing in being watered. Water, please, but take your time. I forgive you. Grow on.